Hi, in this presentation, I'm going to go over the prisoner's dilemma. There are a lot of other shorter videos out there that can explain it to you, but I'm going to try to go into some detail, maybe being a bit pedantic, but hey, that's my job. So the stylization, and I'll be honest, I hate the stylization of a prisoner's dilemma because I think it focuses us on a very contrived story rather than the naturally occurring situations that are prisoner's dilemma in the world. But let's go with the standard story, and I'll do another video where I complain about it. So the standard story, player 1 and 2 have committed a crime. They have a story between them that they've generated, and so if they stick to the story, they can limit their culpability in some way, right? And maybe they, in committing a crime, they killed someone. Oh, the person was dead when we got there, and something like that. Okay, and so they've been arrested and they are in custody. That's why they're prisoners, and they have two strategies. They can cooperate. That is, this is their story. They're going to stick to it, right? If they both stick to their story, that's cooperating. Or they could defect and they could, turn state's evidence on their accomplice, right? And so these are the two standard strategies: cooperate and defect. And so cooperate means to stick to the story, or more generally to whatever agreement there is implied in whatever we're thinking that the players are doing. And the other is to defect, rat out the other guy, or in some way cheat on the original agreement, to broaden it a little bit. Now, the key thing is, in this story, the district attorney is defining the outcomes and payoffs, right? And so the district attorney or the legal system is saying, all right, if both of you stick to your story, we can only get you on some lesser offense and you're going to get light jail sentences, right? You got a good story. However, if one of you testifies and the other sticks to the story, well, the testifier, they go free, and the other does hard times, goes up for life. I mean, the story goes on, but basically the testifier, the person who defects while the other guy cooperates, gets off, and the other player, the other prisoner, not, you're going to do hard time. If you both confess, you're going to do medium time. And then the stories vary, the numbers vary when people do this. But the idea is, if you both confess, well, confessing gets you a lighter sentence than if you get ratted out and you're left holding the bag. But, so we have this kind of medium time thing, right? And so this is the general stylization. Now, what we want to do is put this in normal form, right? And so this is the more pedantic part of this presentation, where I'm going to say, okay, how do we do this in normal form? And what you want to do is, well, we have two players, two strategies. So there we go. We got a table with, 2 by 2. And what you do is you want to say, all right, what are the players' preferences over outcomes? So let's look at player 1. What is player 1's favorite outcome? Remember, each of these cells is an outcome, right? So that upper left-hand cell, cooperate, is an outcome. That's what happens if they stick to their story, right? So what we want to do is we want to figure out what each player's preferences are over these outcomes. So player 1's, the best outcome for player 1, right, is to defect, to turn state's evidence while his accomplice, player 2, cooperates. And the way we tend to label these things is player 1 goes first, right? And whoever is on the rows, whoever's picking between the rows, is player 1 and goes first as a convention. So defect, cooperate is the upper right hand, is the lower right column, right? It is the, right there. I have a pointer. So defect, cooperate is that, and that's the best thing. The next best thing is cooperate, right? And that's where they do, player 1 does light time. They both do light time. Then defect, right? The defect thing is they do medium time. The worst outcome for player 1 is player 1 cooperates and player 2 defects. So we can now, that makes sense. And we get that from the stylization. Now the question is, okay, how do we assign numbers to it? And there's various ways you can do it. The easiest way is to just go with ordinal numbers, right? So say, all right, let's start with the worst outcome and give it a 0. And then for each better outcome, give it a higher number, right? So the worst outcome is cooperate, defect, right? And so we'll give that a 0. The next worst, defect, then cooperate. Now we got a 2, right? Not rocket science. And we got 3. So there we go. That is those are player 1's payoffs, but really these are preferences over the outcomes. Now, you will see depictions of Prisoner's Dilemma where they put the number of years people go to jail, and they're not doing preferences, they're doing actual material aspects, of the outcome, which I think is a bit of a violation of what we're trying to do, but it's a valid way of doing it. Now, let's consider player 2's preferences. And I think we can, we can look at it and just say, all right, player 2's favorite outcome is player 1 cooperates and player 2 defects. Second favorite outcome, the cooperate, where they both do light time. Defect, where they both rat on each other and do kind of medium time. And the worst one is where player 2 cooperates while player 1 defects, right? And so symmetrical to player 1's preferences. And we can just, through the same logic, go ahead and put numbers in there where the worst outcome gets 0, and then each better outcome, starting from the bottom of that list, we move through, we start 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So now we have the Prisoner's Dilemma in normal form. Okay, so now what I want to do is show you how to solve a 2x2 game of the Prisoner's Dilemma in particular, but this is a technique you can use for solving any 2x2 game or 3x3 or whatever, a game in normal form. And it's just basically by iteration, okay? And so it's a little complicated to do, but there's no real math involved. So we solve by iteration, and we just start by arbitrarily having one player pick a strategy. So we start with one player picking a strategy. Hey, let's go with player 1 picking cooperate, right? So player 1 is going to pick cooperate. And if player 1 picks cooperate, then player 1 is effectively restricting the choices of player 2 to the top 2, right? It's picking the row. And so player 2's choice of strategy now becomes a choice between these two outcomes. So what we want to do next is say, okay, what's the other player, player 2 in this case, what's the other player's best response to that strategy we picked at the beginning here? And if we look at it, it's real simple, right? It's player 2's, because it's the second number, the payoff. You just say, which is bigger? Is 2 or 3 bigger? 3 is bigger. So the best response of player 2 is to pick defect, right? And that's it. If player 1 is sticking to the story, what's player 2's best response? Rat him out, right? Get out of jail free. So that is player 2's best response. Now, iteration. We're going to go and say, all right, well, wait a minute. If player 2 does that, then would player 1's choice that we started out with make sense, right? Would that be a best response? Another way to think of it is, hey, if player 1 picked cooperate and player 2 picked defect, would player 1 regret the choice? Which, wow, given that what the other guy did, I wish I'd done something different. That's a big part of a Nash equilibrium, to not have a regret, right? Another way to think of it. So if we look at that, we would go, well, yeah, if player 2 defects, player 1 is going to wish that player 1 had defected to get the light jail time. So, cooperate certainly doesn't make sense. And, well, I've kind of given away, the thing that we do next is what would be the best response. And I've already cut to the chase. Yeah, if player 2 defects, then player 1's best choice, right? It's basically player 1 has got a choice between these two cells here. It's a 0 or a 1 defect. And by the way, in this game, defect is a dominant strategy, right? no matter what the other, for all the other players' strategy choices, each player, or a player prefers to defect, right? Regardless of what the other player does, in both cases, you're better off defecting. So that's a dominant strategy. So, but the point is, though, we go around, we go through iterations until we find an outcome where there's the no regrets, where we basically stop. The iterations come to a kind of a stable sticking point, if you will, and that is the Nash equilibrium. Now, other games will have multiple equilibria, right? And so, for instance, the game of chicken, if you started out, you would immediately get an equilibrium, and you'd have to say, all right, well, I started in one place, let me start in a different place to see if I get a different result. And that's how you discover more Nash equilibria when you solve by iteration. But I think it's pretty straightforward. And this is the Nash equilibrium. In this game, there is only one equilibrium, that is defect, defect, and that's the prediction of what happens in a prisoner's dilemma. So the key aspects of a prisoner's dilemma, one, we have this dominant strategy, right? The insight of a prisoner's dilemma is that both players have a dominant strategy to defect. And that's just the way it is, right? Based on the way the numbers came out in terms of the payoffs, each player has this dominant strategy. But, right, that isn't the only thing. There are a lot of games where players have dominant strategies. The key thing the thing that really makes it interesting here is there's what we call a Pareto superior outcome. Pareto was an economist, right? For a long time, I thought Pareto was some Latin word that meant something. And I'm like, no, it's a guy's name. Oh. And Pareto identified this concept of something being better for everyone, right? And so Pareto efficiency, Pareto superiority refers to a condition in which one outcome or policy or something is better for everyone, right? And in this case, the cooperate outcome is better than the Nash equilibrium, right? It's, in the Nash equilibrium, the defect, it's a 1, right? People do medium time. If they had just stuck to the story, they'd both be better off. And so the prisoner's dilemma captures this notion of an opportunity lost. If we had just cooperated with one another, we would have been better off. But the incentives to defect, the incentives to cheat on our agreement have led us astray. And so we are in a situation where we end up defecting, even though we'd be better off cooperating. And that is the key aspect of a prisoner's dilemma and the thing that draws people to it. And it's not about prisoners, okay? These types of situations in which, hey, if we come to an agreement, we'll do better off. But if I cheat on the agreement, and practically any economic transaction, right? I'll do something for you if you pay me, right? Well, both of us have an incentive to cheat, right? I have an incentive to do a crappy job. You have an incentive to underpay me or not pay me at all, right? And so that is a naturally occurring situation where we're better off if we stick to the agreement, but we each have an incentive to sucker punch the other or to cheat on the other, and that screws it up. This is non-cooperative game theory. There's no, we can't sign a contract and go to court and that kind of thing. And that's something that we think in things like international relations is between nations very much the situation. And so these are the aspects of a prisoner's dilemma, and that's why we're interested in it. And honestly, this whole equilibrium is just the first step, because with a prisoner's dilemma, you eventually talk about, well, how can we get cooperation? And there are things like repeated play and all sorts of other things that will, obviously are the focus of other videos.